Hey everyone, I'm Alyona Minkovski and you're watching the West Coast edition of HuffPost Live. Now first up, you guys know the drill. We go through the top stories of the day. And joining me first to discuss politics and a whole lot more, we've got Sabrina Siddiqui, HuffPost politics reporter in Washington, D.C. Joel Rubin, the Director of Policy and Government Affairs at the Plowshares Fund, also in Washington, D.C. And joining us at the top of our show to discuss a story that was the splash, or still is the splash on the Huffington Post today, we've got Robert Greenwald, filmmaker and writer in Los Angeles, California. So hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
So, Robert, I want to start with you first. This is currently the splash. If you look at the front page of the Huffington Post, it says U.S. drone policy. We see the horrific images of the faces of drone strike victims abroad, including Anwar al-Awlaki there in the center. And you were recently in Pakistan. Some of these photos were taken on that trip. So can you tell us a little bit more? I mean, these are horrific images. And from what we know, this is not even everything. The photographer that you were working with did not show them all. And so, you know, what do you think the point is of showing images like this?
Well, the photographer I interviewed when I was in Pakistan, Noor, was very clear that he was taking these photographs at great risk to himself, his life and his safety, because he wanted to show the world that, in fact, there were many, many children and innocent victims of the drone strikes. We've been fed a bill of goods here in this country, the notion that these are so-called surgical, which is a complete and total fabrication. What Noor did is he's given us the evidence, or some of the evidence, to show young children who are being killed by the drones.
And that's the thing, you know, Robert, you've been trying for a very long time to get people to pay attention to what's happening abroad via drone strikes and some of our military actions. What do you make of, you know, this policy really now coming center stage, becoming part of the debate, but only when it has to do with the possibility of drone strikes on U.S. citizens on U.S. soil?
Well, you know, it's at least the beginning, and people are starting to talk about it. And I feel certain that the more people hear about this policy, the more they will understand that it is fundamentally an immoral policy, it's an illegal policy, and it's a policy that is guaranteed to make us less safe. When I was in Pakistan, person after person talked to me about the number of people who were being radicalized, the number of people who were furious, the number of people who said to me on camera, I'm going to get revenge for the death of my mother, my father, or my children. This is not in any shape or form taking out what used to be the drone policy, just the so-called high-value targets. It's spread under the leadership of the CIA in a horrific fashion.
And it's spread to signature strikes as well, where you don't even need to know who it is that you're necessarily targeting. They just have to exhibit some type of suspicious activity. And thankfully, that's something that Rand Paul did bring up yesterday. And, you know, when he went on this epic 13-hour filibuster last night in protest of John Brennan's CIA directorship nomination. Now, the White House did not respond to the filibuster until today, when Eric Holder went with a very short but sweet approach, and that includes just 43 words. Let me read you the response that came from Eric Holder today. He said, "It has come to my attention that you have now asked an additional question. Does the president have the authority to use a weaponized drone to kill an American not engaged in combat on American soil? The answer to that question is no." Sabrina, what did you make of this response? I mean, I feel like the administration is trying to be cheeky here, as if they didn't really know what it is that Rand Paul, wanted an answer to all along.
Well, I think that there's good and there's bad here. The good is that Senator Rand Paul ultimately was successful in at least eliciting a response. Rarely does a talking filibuster still achieve its goal to have, you know, one's question answered. And Senator Paul was able to obtain the information that he said he was seeking. He seemed to be more concerned with the targeted killing of American citizens on U.S. soil who are not actively engaged in some sort of combat where, you know, extraordinary circumstances, what the administration said before, but that's left open to interpretation. And I think the administration has been trying to push the case that it's referring to a 9/11 or Pearl Harbor kind of situation. At the same time, you know, what they've said is, no, we can't just target American citizens on U.S. soil who are not engaged in combat. But, you know, because the legal rationale remains extraordinary circumstances, I do believe that the administration is kind of leaving open the window for them to determine what an extraordinary circumstance would be. So, you know, one of the problems is that because this sort of talk is now over around Rand Paul's filibuster, we're not really sure if we're going to see much follow-up on the drone program, and certainly whether they're going to continue to shed light on that in Congress and keep it under scrutiny.
And that has been, one of the key problems with this administration is that they do take things into their own interpretation. They won't necessarily show us the legal rationale, and they're very happy to take advantage of very vague definitions of things, so that you have to start dealing with hypotheticals like this. But, that pithy Democratic response really mirrors the turnout of the Democrats on the Senate floor yesterday. Sabrina, I know that you spoke to some Democratic senators. You tried to press them. And what reasoning did they give you as to why they did not stand with Rand yesterday, of course, with the exception of Ron Wyden?
Well, a lot of them gave a wide variety of excuses, everything from, I didn't really have time, to I'm focused on other issues, to, I agree with a lot of the questions he was raising, but I didn't think that this was the appropriate method to raise those questions. The reality is, unfortunately, that Democrats were very unlikely to take that kind of a stance against President Obama and his administration. Now, people had speculated whether they received any kind of directive from the White House to not take a stand. I did have a Senate Democratic aide say that was not the case. Certainly his office didn't receive any kind of word from the White House not to do that. But at the same time, if they did receive that word, I doubt they would share that with reporters. I think it ultimately comes down to Democrats not wanting to, stand on the floor with Republicans and contest, their own president in this on this, huge stage. I mean, we saw the whole day's worth of news coverage revolve around Rand Paul and his filibuster.
Yeah, but then they're letting partisan politics, stand before constitutional rights and, and civil liberties and freedoms that we all should ignore. Robert, I'm curious to hear what you think about this. I think Amy Goodman was writing about it today, saying that the Democratic Party should be totally ashamed that they did not actually stand up for this yesterday.
I think it's one of the most disgusting and immoral displays that I can ever remember seeing. Now, granted, I have a deep feeling in my gut because of the time I spent in Pakistan talking to people whose children were killed by drones, talking to a father whose 65-year-old mother was killed by drones. But the notion that Democrats should decide they're going to go silent, can you imagine for a minute if this were George Bush doing this? Just think about the outrage and the yells and the screams. It would be extraordinary. And I think this will be, for a very long time, something that each of those elected politicians who know better and are not speaking up should hide their head.
Can't say that I disagree with you there. I could not agree with you more. In fact, I think that it's deeply disturbing. But the problem is that kind of, some of this is a moot point now because John Brennan has officially been confirmed as the head of the CIA by a bipartisan vote of 63 to 34. And so, Robert, sure, maybe Rand Paul knew going into it that this was going to be more of a symbolic gesture, that he would highlight the issue. But now at the end of the day, has anything been resolved if John Brennan is going to head the CIA?
Well, remember, this is a long-term battle. I reminded her when I had got back from Afghanistan, and it seemed like virtually the entire world was in favor of the so-called good war. This takes a bit of time. It's going to take time to change people's mind. I think that Senator Paul did us all a great service by raising the issue and beginning to get people to think about it. Look, the more people think about this, the more it makes no fundamental sense, and it's truly immoral. How dare an elected official, or even worse, a staffer who works for an elected official, decide who's going to live and die? No trial, no jury, no evidence. Not one single person has been captured. Over 4,000 have been killed. That's criminal behavior. If another country were doing this, we would outlaw them. We'd be writing reports about them. And I think that we're seeing the beginning of people caring and waking up. But we all have a lot of work to do. And I'm so appreciative of HuffPost putting up those photos today, because you look at those photos and you can't retreat into some abstract policy decision. You see children who've been killed or injured by our actions.
And these are things that, like you said, people need to see. It's about time that people really do wake up. Robert, we want to thank you so much for joining us, and as well for sharing those pictures so that the Huffington Post can put them up, for everyone to see.
Thank you.